again, and welcome back. Here we are to talk about SwiftUI and building user interfaces with SwiftUI. In the previous video, we talked about some background information. We talked about what is UIKit, what is SwiftUI, how would you use SwiftUI, and we toured a SwiftUI project and looked at some code written with the SwiftUI API. What I'd like to do in this video is actually build some projects or build a user interface with SwiftUI. Let's get our hands dirty, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to close Xcode, or close that project anyway. And then I'm going to open up I just clicked on Xcode to get this little sample thing back right here, but I'm going to go to the File menu and choose New Project, okay? So I'm in Xcode, I'm going to choose File, New Project. And when we create a new project, what we're going to do is we're going to select the platform, okay? So I'll choose iOS as my platform. And then what I want to build is an app. And they give us a couple default starting apps. So we can build a document app, a game app, an augmented reality app, a sticker pack app, a messaging app, right? I'm going to just pick app. That's like a blank app, okay? It's a good starting place. So click Next. And then the interface is going to ask us for some information. So we can give our project a name. I'm going to call it SwiftUI example. And then you can pick a team if you have one, and you can pick an organization identifier or type anything in here. And what we want to make sure, though, for this project is that the interface is set to SwiftUI and the lifecycle is set to SwiftUI app. And the language is set to Swift. So it should be Swift, 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 okay? You should uncheck the boxes here because we're not going to use core data or include any tests. Next, click the Next button, and then Xcode will ask you, like, hey, where do you want to save this project? So the project itself is just a folder full of files, right? So just think, like, where do I want to put this folder full of files that will represent the application that I'm making, okay? I'm going to put mine on the desktop here. One side note, too, if you check the box here, Xcode will initialize a Git repository inside your project folder, right? So if you're going to use GitHub to manage your files, then you can check the box there. So last, click Create. Okay, great. So here is our SwiftUI project in Xcode. So let's take a quick tour of the Xcode interface before we actually start writing some code, okay? So what we have here is several like columns, right? So the column on the left has a bunch of options at the top that display different things depending on what you're doing, right? So this option here is a pane that just shows your tests, right? This one is a search pane, so you can look for stuff in your project or search things out. The first one is probably the little folder there is probably the most important one, and this one represents the like files and folders that make up your project, okay? So usually you're going to be working here. So if you don't see this list of files and folders, like click this little button there, okay? Next, the pane right here in the center is where you write your code. So this is like the editor. So this is where you're going to do most of your work, right? Next to the pane right here, I have this thing with the stripes through it. This is the canvas that I mentioned earlier. So when we are working with SwiftUI, what's going to happen is it's going to draw the SwiftUI user interface that we're making in this area, right? It's not drawing anything now because I didn't click the button here. So you can click this resume button and it will start to draw the interface for us, right? Last, you have this inspector right here. So when it says no selection, right? So when you click on something, it gives you information about the thing that you clicked on, right? So actually, let me click on a file over here, right? Let me click on one of these. I don't know why it's not showing me anything. Yeah, there we go, right? So I'll click on this guy, right? So it shows me a bunch of information about this thing, right? You can pick the device and the layout and some other things, right? We're usually not going to use this, right? And there's actually some other information too. This will tell you about a file, and this allows you to set up settings for any particular thing, right? So you can click this little button here to close the column on the side there. And I'm going to do that so I can have a little more room right? And you can close this one too if you don't need it. So you can click on this thing right there if you want, right? I'm going to leave it like this. So let's talk about SwiftUI. So inside of the code here, you can see we're importing SwiftUI, and then there's two structs. There's one here and there's one at the bottom, okay? The first struct is the user interface that we're creating. So right now our user interface only contains the text, right? Just a text object, and that's what we're seeing here, right? The second one, where it says content view preview, is just used to generate the preview that you see in the canvas. So this is actually not used, to my understanding, in a production app. This would render to our production app, but this is only used for, you know, building code and only in Xcode to render your project, right? Okay, so so this we're not going to do anything with, right? And you'll notice inside here, it says it creates an instance of content view. So basically it's making an instance of this object up here, right? You know, and that's the only job here of this block. Okay, so let's take a look at what we have here. So you can see I've got, you know, text, and then it says padding, right? Okay, and then the text says hello world. Well, we could change this to foobar, you know, and then the text here, wait a minute. Something, you know, sometimes it doesn't update. I'm going to click that button there again. Let me click resume again. Yeah, there we go, right? So usually it updates automatically. I don't know why. Hello bar. Yeah, now it's doing it, right? So hello world, exclamation point, right? So now it updates every time. So sometimes, like, you got to kick it and make it work, right? Usually it's clicking that resume button. I don't actually know why it stops. Maybe I did something in here that made it stop, you know. Anyway, so this created the text object, right? You'll also notice that when you click, what's kind of cool here is if you click on an object, usually it'll show you like an outline to show you where that object is that you're working with in the view, right? So it'll show you what the thing is. Like you saw it there a second ago, like it had a little box around it. Actually, I don't know where it went this time. Well, I'm not going to worry about it, right? But that's kind of nice, right? And you can also click on the thing here. If you hold the command key, or is it the control key? No, I think it's the command key. It'll give you a menu. I don't know why it wants to not cooperate when I'm doing the video. Let me try. Oh yeah, there we go, right? There we go, right? Okay, so I think I was in a different mode maybe. I don't know. I'm still new to this. So you can see the outline here, and when I click on the text, you can see that it outlines the object there, right? So it kind of shows you what the text is rendering in the view, okay? When we add more views, you'll be able to pick out different views and see a box around them. The padding right here is the space that we see between the blue box and the text, right? So if I was to remove the padding, you'll see that that outline kind of changes, right? It kind of hugs the text tightly, right? Let's put the padding back in there just for fun, right? So there's our padding now, right? And again, if you command click on this thing, you get this menu and you can choose some options. So there's some things that you can edit directly here. Usually it's probably better to edit in the code, right? And I think as you work with this, you'll see like if you edit something here, it'll actually edit the code there. I think it's best to just work in the code though most of the time, or at least that makes more sense to me. Okay, so let's try something here. If we have more than one object, this was confusing to me at first, but let me try this for you, right? So I'm going to create a second text object, and we'll call this one, oh yeah, double quotes in Xcode there. I'm going to call this one foo and bar. Okay, and it looks a little weird here. I have two views now. I got the foobar view and I got the hello world view, okay? Because I've created two views here, okay? So really you have to have like one top level view that contains any subviews, okay? So you can have as many views as you want, but one view has to bind them all together, okay? So in SwiftUI, it's probably most common to create a stack view of some kind. So let's imagine I want to have foobar and hello world appear one on top of the other inside a single view. What I would do is add a vertical stack, okay? So the vertical stack looks like this. You're going to say VStack and then follow it with the parentheses. And then I'm going to take the two text objects here and embed them inside the VStack. And now what you'll see is you'll see the first text object stacked on top of the other one, right? And you know, maybe I could add some padding to this one right here. And there we go. Now they both get some padding, right? Okay, great. Let's talk a little bit more about the text object, right? So what if you wanted to set some properties on the text object? So this is like a little weird, you gotta get used to the style here, but you know, if you think about it, let's actually talk about padding for a second here, right? And then while we're thinking, right? So notice that what I did is I called text, and then I used the dot and I followed it with padding. So what happened is text returned some object to me, and that object had a padding method that I could call on, right? So that's the way this works. It's kind of like a factory system. So if we want to call another method, we could say font, and that's, you know, text object was created, it returned a text object. Text object has a padding method, so you can call padding on the text object. Padding returns the text object, and now I can call font on the text object. So essentially, like all of these things that we're following with the dot are the same object that you had at the beginning, right? Okay, so it's typical that you'll write these where you put the dot on the next line and then tab it in once to show that it's, you know, kind of associated with this element, right? And then this one is not tabbed, right? Because it doesn't belong to the first text object. Instead, it's its own thing, right? So, anyway, so there's our font, and then you can put a value in here, and there's a few different values. I'm going to put dot title, right? And so this font style right here is an enum, I think, internally. So we can say dot and then get one of the enum values off there, right? Yeah, so then it gives me a couple options here. So I can choose, you know, body text style, you know, and that should be smaller, I think. Yes, that's a smaller text. I can choose title, and that's the large text. I can choose caption, right? And that's kind of really small. I can choose caption. I think there's a caption number 2, and that's even smaller, right? So I'm going to choose title here, okay? So let's set the color. So to set the color on the text, what we're going to do is we're going to do dot foreground color, okay? And then actually, let me back up there. Let's do foreground, right? You'll see that it takes color as a parameter, right? Okay, and that's a type. It's an enum, so we can say dot and one of the color values, right? And there's a couple other ways to call this, right? We have another choice here that says foreground color, and then you use color as a parameter name, and you say what color it is, right? Actually, wait a minute. That's actually the same one, right? It's actually, sorry, that was my mistake. So actually, this is the same one. It's telling me that it's type color. I'm still getting used to the SwiftUI, right? So here we are. I've got blue as the color. You could choose, there's a bunch of built-in colors. So you can say, you know, dot orange, you know, I could say dot black, right? Or red, okay? And what if you want to set the background color, right? So the background color is, oops, wait, I gotta put the dot in there, dot background, and then you can set the background. So background is a type because there's a few different things you can put in the background. So you don't just set the color, right? So what we'll do is we'll say background, and then it asks for a view. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to say color and then say that the color type that I want. So I want to do like orange, I guess, right? You know? And then I get an orange box with a red foreground, which isn't a great look, but it's not bad. What if I did white on the orange, right? That doesn't look too bad, right? So anyway, so there's kind of an introduction to how you might make views in SwiftUI, right? So we talked about the VStack. So anytime I add something to the vertical stack, it'll be stacked up vertically. You can see here, if I select the VStack, the blue outline goes around all of the child elements inside the stack, right? And I have two children here. I have text and text, okay? And if I was to add another text item here, let's do text and put in a string, say a string, I don't know, I'm running out of things to say. So now I'd have another text object here. This one doesn't have any padding, right? So if I want to set properties on that, I can do that here. Oops, it said clipped. I don't want that one. I want padding. Okay, so then I get some padding there. So again, the VStack manages the children, right? So there's 3 children here, and they're always going to be arranged in a vertical stack. And VStack has some options that you can assign to it to say how it arranges its children, okay? Next, oops, I deleted that by accident. And then next, when we call on something like text or one of the other view types, it returns itself, so you can call another method on that same view. So in this case, I'm returning a text view, and I'm calling padding on that text view, and then I'm calling font on that text view, and then I'm calling foreground color and background on the text view, okay? Third, oftentimes the values that you use for any of the methods that you're calling on a view, one of the values will be an enum. So that's especially true when it comes to color and font styles, right? When it comes to padding, you can actually add a value in there to set the numeric value. So if it's a number, there isn't an enum, you just type the number in. But if it's a non-numeric value, then there's a lot of enums in use here, okay? So kind of get used to seeing that and kind of ask yourself like where that dot is coming from and what it means, right? So this dot here means it's a method of this object. This dot here means that it's a member of an enum, right? Because we're passing a value into that function as a parameter. Okay, so anyway, so that gets you started. Try and experiment with your view and try and arrange it, and then in the next video we'll dig into the VStack and the HStack.